Her extended arm reaches 305 feet into the air. She has a 420-inch waist. That's 35 feet. Her index finger extends just over 8 feet. She wears 60,000 pounds of copper. Her colossal scale embodies the immensity of the concept she honors, liberty. She is adorned with a 9-foot crown, accentuated with 7 spikes to represent the 7 oceans and the 7 continents of the world, representing liberty as a universal concept to spread across the globe. On Liberty Island in New York Harbor stands one of the world's most incredible sights, the awe-inspiring Statue of Liberty Enlightening the World. At her 1886 dedication, she stood as the tallest man-made structure in the world and the most remarkable statue ever constructed. About 3.5 million people annually visit the statue and its museum. But also on Liberty Island, in the shadow of the symbol of America, stand 2 other clusters of bronze statues, created by sculptor Philip Ratner. One group represents the more than 12 million immigrants that were welcomed to America by Lady Liberty as ships arrived at nearby Ellis Island. The second group of statues commemorates 5 people who contributed greatly to the completion and legacy of the Statue of Liberty. A French politician, Edward de la Boulaye, a French engineer, Alexander Gustave Eiffel, a French sculptor, Frederick Auguste Bartholdi, an American publisher, Joseph Pulitzer, and an American poet, Emma Lazarus. With the support of hundreds of thousands of French and American citizens, they brought a remarkable concept to reality, a gigantic statue to represent the powerful ideal of liberty. This is the story of visionary dreams, enormous struggle, the power of many, an unlikely international achievement in partnership between France and the United States, the precious concept of liberty, an icon of immigration, and a mighty feminine colossus named for her purpose, Liberty Enlightening the World. Welcome to this History Highlights presentation, sharing the story and legacy of the Statue of Liberty. My name is Bill Wiemuth, and I'm excited to share with you this amazing story about one of the great American icons. You know, you can experience fascinating true stories with History Highlights paperback books, ebooks, audiobooks, and video presentations that you can read, listen to, or watch in about an hour. We offer an array of riveting tales ranging from the United States' westward expansion to the Civil War, with stories of intriguing people, dramatic events, and significant impact. You can receive access to free learning programs and special discount offers and updates when we publish new books. You can register for free at historyhighlights.com. In this presentation, we will explore how the vision began for a remarkable gift from the people of France to the people of the United States, and the remarkable people, struggles, and drama that brought that vision to reality. Get ready for a journey of discovery. The vision. In the first few months of 1865, the United States Congress passed the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery, and the Union of the United States was preserved by the Union victory over the rebellion of the Confederated Southern States. Across the Atlantic, in Paris, France, Frenchman Edward de la Boulaye was thrilled and inspired. La Boulaye was a professor, politician, writer, and anti-slavery activist. As a fervent admirer of the United States Constitution, La Boulaye wrote a 3-volume work chronicling the political history of the United States. He had been a zealous advocate of the Union cause and the abolition of slavery, publishing histories of the cultural connections between the two nations. As the United States Civil War ended in 1865, he became president of the French Emancipation Committee to aid newly freed slaves in the United States. Laboulaye believed that the United States legislation to abolish slavery was a milestone that proved that justice and liberty for all was possible. Laboulaye lived in a little village near the Palace of Versailles. At a dinner party, Laboulaye discussed the idea of presenting a statue representing liberty as a gift to the United States, as a gesture of celebration, and to help strengthen France's relationship with the United States. One of Laboulaye's friends at that dinner party was sculptor Frederick Auguste Bartholdi. The suggestion was a lasting one. Years later, Bartholdi remembered Laboulaye's words. If a monument were ever built in America to celebrate the independence of the United States, it would be fitting that it be built by the united efforts of France and the United States, since they struggled together for American independence. The statue would not only commemorate the progress of freedom in the United States, but also illuminate the suppression of freedom France was enduring under the rule of Napoleon III. Laboulaye hoped that by calling attention to the recent achievements of the United States, the French people would be inspired to call for their own democracy in the face of a repressive monarchy. Bartholdi wrote, "I will try to glorify the Republic and liberty over there, in hope that someday I will find it again here in France, if it can be done." Bartholdi. Auguste Bartholdi was born on August 2, 1834, in Colmar, Alsace, France. He was a talented young man and studied art, sculpture, and architecture. At age 21, Bartholdi and some fellow artists visited Egypt to view the Sphinx and pyramids of Giza. Bartholdi was enthralled by the massive artwork and their timelessness. He wrote, "We were filled with profound emotion in the presence of these colossal witnesses, centuries old, of a past that to us is almost infinite, at whose feet so many generations, so many million existences, so many human glories have rolled in the dust." Bartholdi's talent soon involved him in many projects. To sit at the northern entrance to the Suez Canal, he proposed to build an enormous lighthouse in the form of an ancient Egyptian female peasant, robed and holding a torch aloft. He called it Egypt, or Progress, carrying the light to Asia. He drew inspiration from the legendary colossus of Rhodes, an ancient bronze statue of the Greek god of the sun Helios, believed to have been over 100 feet tall, which also stood at a harbor entrance and carried a light to guide ships. Unfortunately, Bartholdi's Suez Canal project never came to fruition due to expenses. According to Bartholdi, Laboulaye's alleged comment about the gift of a monument from France to the United States was not intended as a proposal, but it did inspire Bartholdi. He later wrote, "The idea remained fixed in my memory." But in July of 1870, France declared war on Prussia, and any dreams of a large project were overshadowed by the Franco-Prussian War. Bartholdi became a major in the National Guard of the Seine. In the war, Napoleon III was captured and deposed. France lost the fight to protect Bartholdi's home province of Alsace, which was lost to the Prussians. However, a more liberal republic developed in France. So, in 1871, Bartholdi and Laboulaye decided the time was right to discuss the monument idea with influential Americans. On June 8, 1871, Bartholdi sailed for America. Sailing into New York Harbor was like arriving at the gateway to America. Bartholdi took notice of an island situated right at that harbor entrance and learned it was called Bedloe's Island. He wrote, "I have found the admirable spot. It is Bedloe's Island, just opposite the Narrows, which are, so to speak, the gateway of America." His friend and mentor, Laboulaye, was well respected and renowned in the United States due to popular English translations of Laboulaye's series of books about the United States Constitution and another biography series about Benjamin Franklin. The letters of introduction provided by Laboulaye gained access for Bartholdi to many of America's brightest and most powerful people. Bartholdi even met President Ulysses S. Grant at Grant's summer home in Long Branch, New Jersey. Bartholdi discussed the ambitious project, and Grant assured him that it would not be difficult to obtain a site for the statue. Bartholdi traveled to Philadelphia and met with more of America's early leaders. He learned that Philadelphia would host an elaborate 1876 exposition to celebrate the nation's centennial. Bartholdi even discussed creating a large work for the event. In Washington, D.C., he was thrilled to meet Massachusetts Senator and famed abolitionist Charles Sumner. Bartholdi delighted that Sumner was a Francophile, and his house was filled with French art and furnishings. Sumner had been in the Senate for 20 years. In 1852, Sumner had given his first ferocious speech in the Senate denouncing slavery. His bold opposition eventually led to South Carolina Democratic Representative Preston Brooks savagely beating Sumner on the Senate floor in May of 1856. Sumner was absent recovering for the rest of the year and returned to the Senate in 1857 for only a single day. With only brief and infrequent Senate appearances, Sumner traveled across Europe for much of the next 2 years, including extended stays in France. He and La Boulaye shared many of the same passions for liberty and the abolition of slavery. By June of 1860, Sumner was back in the Senate and again vehemently denouncing slavery. To Bartholdi and most Americans, Sumner was a legend who was either revered or hated. Bartholdi continued on to meet VIPs in Boston and even visited Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Bartholdi had met Longfellow's son Charles while in Egypt. Bartholdi wanted to see more of America. He learned that very few Americans had ever visited the West, and that travel was rumored to be difficult. Undeterred, toward the end of August 1871, Bartholdi departed westward from New York's new Grand Central Depot. He visited Chicago, Illinois, and then proceeded on to Omaha, Nebraska. Occasionally, the train held for hours waiting for immense herds of buffalo to pass. In Utah, he visited Promontory Point to view the spot where the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific had connected the continent's first transcontinental railroad just 2 years earlier in 1869. Further west was just a sprinkling of rough boom towns. Salt Lake City seemed like an oasis in the wilderness. The mythical temple seated 8,000 people. After meeting the Mormon leader, Brigham Young, Bartholdi wrote to his mother with amazement that Young had 16 wives and 49 children. In California, he disembarked the train to detour a full day's rough and dusty stagecoach journey to see the giant redwoods. He arrived at nightfall to a crude inn, but was led awestruck on a moonlight hike into trees 400 to 600 years old, 20 feet around, and 350 feet tall. Their oversized grandeur must have connected with Bartholdi's love of colossal beauty. When he returned to the nation's capital, Congress was in session, and Senator Sumner introduced Bartholdi to many influential people around Washington. Throughout his nationwide travels, Bartholdi continually promoted the idea of the monument and wrote to La Boulaye, "The ground is well prepared, only the spark will have to be provided by a manifestation on the part of France." Sailing out of New York, Bartholdi again envisioned a great statue standing on the little Bedloes Island. He wrote, "I am sure that it is right that on that island should rise liberty enlightening the world. It is exactly here that my statue should be erected, here where people have their first view of the New World." During Bartholdi's absence, France had endured civil war and Paris was severely damaged. He and La Boulaye decided to wait before mounting a public campaign. Bartholdi continued to develop drawings and models for the concept. He also worked on several large sculptures designed to bolster French patriotism after the defeat by the Prussians. In 1872, Bartholdi and Laboulaye founded the Franco-American Union in Paris to raise funds for the construction of their envisioned statue. Bartholdi's design ideas were formulating, but he needed a model to help him develop the design. The following year, while at a friend's wedding, he spotted a young woman with the body shape, posture, and arms that he envisioned. He learned that her name was Jeanne Emilie, and she worked as a seamstress assistant. Despite the difference in economic class, the two fell in love, and she moved to Paris to model for him. However, he repeatedly could not summon the courage to reveal the relationship to his affluent mother. From vision to reality. Design. With the modeling help of Jeanne Emilie, the design concept for the statue began to develop. Liberty, derived from Libertas, the goddess of freedom, was widely worshipped in ancient Rome. A liberty figure already adorned most American coins at the time. A representation of liberty already crowned the dome of the United States Capitol building. Bartholdi wished to give the statue a peaceful appearance and chose for the figure to hold in her right hand a torch, representing the enlightenment needed to achieve liberty. In her left hand, she would hold a tablet inscribed in Roman numerals to commemorate the July 4, 1776 date of the United States Declaration of Independence. As a tribute to the nation's recent abolition of slavery, a broken shackle and chain would lay at the statue's feet as she steps forward in progress. Her head would be crowned with a halo of 7 rays to represent liberty expanding to the 7 seas and the 7 continents. Bartholdi wrote of his vision, "The surfaces should be broad and simple, defined by a bold and clear design, accentuated in the important places. The enlargement of the details or their multiplicity is to be feared. By exaggerating the forms in order to render them more clearly visible, or by enriching them with details, we would destroy the proportion of the work. Finally, the model, like the design, should have a summarized character, such as one would give to a rapid sketch. Only it is necessary that this character should be the product of volition and study, and that the artist, concentrating his knowledge, should find the form and the line in its greatest simplicity." Bartholdi's friend and mentor, architect Eugene Viollet-le-Duc, designed a brick pier to anchor the statue, and to which the metal skin would be anchored. After consultations with the metalwork foundry Gadget, Gauthier and Company, copper was chosen for the skin. The copper sheets could be heated and then shaped with wooden hammers. Bartholdi decided for the height of the final statue to be just over 151 feet. Progress. The project progressed in increments for the next several years in a symbiotic partnership of fundraising, construction, and promotion. Each element empowered the others. Promotional events fueled fundraising, which enabled construction, which supported additional promotion. Philadelphian John W. Forney visited Paris on a goodwill tour promoting the upcoming 1876 United States Centennial Exposition. During Bartholdi's tour of America, they had discussed the possibility of Bartholdi designing a large fountain for the exposition. But when Forney saw Bartholdi's model of liberty, he wanted it completed for display at the Centennial. Forney assisted with fundraising efforts, and the project advanced. By 1875, France's post-war economy was recovering, and its politics somewhat stabilized. The increasing interest in the United States Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia led Laboulaye to decide it was time to seek public support. A formal birthday celebration for liberty was held on November the 6th of 1875 with a formal dinner at the Louvre Hotel. They proposed the project as a joint effort, a partnership between France and the United States. France would fund the statue if the Americans would provide a location and pedestal for her. The Franco-American Union would coordinate fundraising in France. Initially focused on the elites, the Union was eventually successful in raising funds from across French society. The project grew to be a matter of national French pride, funded by the public and not with governmental money. School children and ordinary citizens contributed, including 181 French municipalities and more than 100,000 individual donors. A French copper industrialist donated 128,000 pounds of copper for the project. 200 bronze castings of the statue's model were sold, as well as tickets to view the construction activity. The French government authorized a lottery. In the next several years, hundreds of thousands of francs were raised. At the Gadget and Gauthier shop in the winter of 1875, Bartholdi explained his idea to a team of assembled workers. From the approved 4-foot plaster model, they would measure and enlarge to an 8-foot model, then expand again to a 36-foot model. Then the pieces would again be meticulously measured and again quadrupled in size. Over 1,200 marks would be measured 3 times each. They would then build a custom wooden frame to fit every curve of the plaster. Then workers would overlay copper on the wooden frames and hammer the pieces into shape. The hundreds of pieces would then be assembled like a puzzle and attached with rivets to a metal frame, like a skin overlaid on a skeleton. Work continued on the arm, hand, and torch to be displayed at the United States Centennial Exhibition. Preview pieces. In May of 1876, Bartholdi traveled to the United States as a member of the French delegation of the Centennial Exhibition. The large and ornate fountain of light and water that he had designed was a popular attraction. After the exhibition, the fountain was relocated and still stands as a centerpiece of the United States Botanic Garden in Washington, D.C. While Bartholdi awaited shipment of the statue's massive arm and torch, he traveled to New York City, and on July the 4th, he first visited Bedloe's Island with a crew to take preliminary measurements. Isaac Bedloe had acquired title to the island in 1667. It later served as a quarantine and hospital. The United States government acquired the island in 1800, and a coastal fortification was constructed. During the Civil War, it operated as a Union recruiting station. After surveying the island, Bartholdi that night visited the studio of his friend John Lafarge. In a moment of apparent heartache, Bartholdi confided to John and John's wife Margaret about his love for Jean Emily and his inability to tell his mother. Margaret suggested he send for Jean Emily and that they marry there. Bartholdi mailed Jean Emily the suggestion the following morning. On August 12th, the completed torch-bearing arm finally arrived from France in 21 crates. It was transported to Philadelphia, assembled, and debuted for the Centennial Exhibition's New York Day celebration on September 21st. Crowds were mesmerized and enjoyed climbing to the balcony of the torch to view the fairgrounds. After the exhibition, the pieces also were displayed in Madison Square in New York City until 1882 to assist in fundraising. Thrilled with Bartholdi's romantic offer, Jean Emily traveled to America and the two were married on December 15, 1876 at the Lafarges home in Newport, Rhode Island. In early January 1877, Bartholdi assisted with setting up the American Committee for the Statue of Liberty to coordinate fundraising in the United States for the pedestal. Committees were formed in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. Bartholdi and his new bride traveled back to Paris. His mother awaited the new couple and quickly grew fond of Jean-Emilie. They soon learned that on March 3, 1877, on his final full day in office, President Ulysses Grant signed a joint resolution to accept the statue when it was presented by France and to select a site for it. President Rutherford B. Hayes soon agreed to commit the Bedloes Island site that Bartholdi had proposed. With fundraising progressing, Bartholdi concentrated on completing the statue's enormous head. During the construction, the Paris workshop was visited by former United States President Ulysses Grant while he traveled abroad in the autumn of 1877. By June of 1878, the statue's head was moved on a cart by 12 horses through the city streets to be displayed to great acclaim at the Paris Universal Exhibition of 1878. The beginning. As fundraising allowed, the work continued. Bartholdi's lead engineer became ill in 1879 and soon died. The following year, Bartholdi contracted Gustave Eiffel to design and build an enormous iron truss tower. Eiffel planned for the structure to flex and move slightly in winds or as the metal expanded in heat. He included 2 interior staircases for visitors to access the observation area in the crown. The statue would be completely constructed there in France, then disassembled and transported to the United States to be reassembled on Bedloes Island. The momentous project officially began on October 24, 1881, as United States Ambassador to France Levi Morton ceremoniously hammered in the first rivet to attach a copper plate onto the statue's big toe. By the middle of summer 1882, she was completed up to her waist, and Bartholdi celebrated by inviting reporters to lunch on a platform built within the statue. For portions of 1883, work stopped when it became apparent that America had raised no funds for a foundation and pedestal. The project suffered a significant blow when Edward de Laboulaye died on May 25th of 1883. But a new, highly visible supporter took up the torch of advocacy. The French committee welcomed new chairman Ferdinand de Lesseps, who had become famous as the project manager for building the Suez Canal. After a month-long United States exhibition raised $12,000, Bartholdi and his workers went back to work. Piece by piece and day by day, the statue rose above Paris until fully constructed. A series of celebration dinners followed. Officials announced that the French government would provide transportation for the statue to the United States. On July 4, 1884, United States Ambassador Morton received the formal presentation from Ferdinand de Lesseps as guests climbed the 12 stories up 168 steps to the crown. As the statue towered over Paris for the following months, an array of dignitaries visited, including 82-year-old author Victor Hugo. Hugo afterward wrote to Bartholdi with these insightful words: "Form to the sculptor is all and yet nothing. It is nothing without the spirit. With the idea, it is everything." Across the Atlantic, the United States completed construction of a 50-foot-thick foundation, which was built at a cost of almost $100,000. The cornerstone for the massive pedestal was laid on August 5th of 1884. The statue remained intact in Paris as Bartholdi waited for the Americans to make sufficient progress on the pedestal. Finally, in January 1885, workers began to disassemble, number, label, and crate the statue in preparation for her ocean voyage. Many French were saddened to see her depart, so a group of wealthy Americans in Paris raised funds to have a 35-foot bronze cast of Bartholdi's studio model made to remain in Paris. where it is still on public display on an island in the Seine River. To America. By early May of 1885, the statue was loaded into 214 crates and onto a special train of 70 cars. Many French citizens lined the streets to bid her a fond bon voyage. Loaded aboard the ship Isère, Lady Liberty departed France on May 22nd and endured 10 days of severe storms during her almost month-long ocean crossing. When the Isère finally arrived in New York on June 19, 1885, some 200,000 people lined the docks and more than 100 vessels escorted the ship in from Sandy Hook to Bedloe Island. But there was still no pedestal for the statue to be erected upon. For the previous 6 months, the construction of the pedestal had halted due to lack of funds. Work had restarted only a week before the cargo arrived. So the Statue of Liberty was unloaded onto the island and sat waiting in her crates for over a year after leaving France. United States fundraising. Fundraising efforts in the United States to support the Statue of Liberty project proved difficult. The Panic of 1873 had led to an economic depression that persisted through much of the decade. American committees took little action for several years. Governor Grover Cleveland of New York in 1884 vetoed a bill to provide $50,000 for the statue project. An attempt the following year to have Congress provide $100,000, sufficient to complete the project, also failed. By 1885, the committee had spent almost $180,000 and had less than $3,000 remaining. With the project in jeopardy, groups from other American cities, including Boston and Philadelphia, offered to pay the full cost of erecting the statue in return for relocating it. On March 13, 1885, the press reported that work on the foundation would cease. Publisher of New York's The World newspaper, Joseph Pulitzer, came to Lady Liberty's rescue. His mantra, he said, was, "Publicity, publicity, publicity is the greatest moral factor and force in our public life." Pulitzer wrote in a March 16, 1885 article, "We must raise the money. The World is the people's paper, and now it appeals to the people to come forward and raise the money. The $250,000 that the making of the statue cost was paid by the masses of the French people, by the working men, the tradesmen, the shop girls, the artisans, by all, irrespective of class or condition. Let us respond in like manner. Let us not wait for the millionaires to give us this money. It is not a gift from the millionaires of France to the millionaires of America, but a gift of the whole people of France to the whole people of America. It would be an irrevocable disgrace for the city of New York and the American Republic to see France send us this splendid gift without our having furnished simply a place to put it. There is only one thing to do. We must collect money. The World is the people's paper, and it now appeals to the people to come forward and raise the money. Take this appeal to yourself personally. Give something, however little." Thanks to Pulitzer's crusade, the World's campaign was so popular that by August the 11th of 1885, the World had collected just over $100,000 in donations to complete the pedestal. Roughly 125,000 people contributed, and 80% of the total was received in sums of less than $1. In thanks, the World published the names of each person who donated, no matter its size, an act that also advanced the sales of Pulitzer's newspaper. One read, "Enclosed, please find 5 cents as a poor office boy's mite to the pedestal's fund." A group of children wrote, "We send you $1, the money we have saved to go to the circus with." As the donations flooded in, the committee resumed work on the pedestal. Bartholdi visited the United States again for 3 weeks in November of 1885 to assess the progress. Construction. The foundation of Bartholdi's statue was laid inside Fort Wood, a disused army base on Bedloe's Island, constructed between 1807 and 1811. Since 1823, it had rarely been used, though during the Civil War it had served as a recruiting station. The fortifications of the structure were in the shape of an 11-point star. The statue's foundation and pedestal were aligned so that it would face southeast, greeting ships entering the harbor from the Atlantic Ocean. The New York Committee had commissioned architect Richard Morris Hunt to design the pedestal. In Hunt's original conception, the pedestal was to have been made of solid granite. Financial concerns forced him to revise his plans, so the final design called for poured concrete walls up to 20 feet thick, faced with granite blocks. The concrete mass was the largest poured to that time. When the pedestal's 56 million pounds of concrete and granite was finally completed in April 1886, reassembly of the statue immediately began. The iron skeletal structural framework designed by Gustave Eiffel went up within 3 months, and by July 12, 1886, the first copper pieces were added with the first of the 600,000 rivets required to reassemble the statue. The rest of the statue's elements followed without the use of scaffolding. All construction materials were hoisted up by steam-driven cranes and derricks. As the statue was erected in 1886, it was the tallest structure in the world. Bartholdi wrote, "Colossus statuary does not consist simply in making an enormous statue. It ought to produce an emotion in the breast of the spectator, not because of its volume, but because its size is in keeping with the idea that it interprets and with the place which it ought to occupy." Dedication. As the statue neared completion, an elaborate ceremony was planned for October 28, 1886. Congress approved $56,000 to clean up the construction site and facilitate the ceremonies. Renowned landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted supervised a cleanup of Bledsoe's Island. Olmsted already had served as co-designer of Manhattan's Central Park and Brooklyn's Prospect Park. Just days before the unveiling, Bartholdi wrote that even though he was concerned about some of the lines, he felt proud. He wrote, "It is a success. I believe that it will last until eternity." October 28th of 1886 was rainy, but response was numerous and enthusiastic. A crowd estimated to contain up to 1 million people gathered along a 5-mile parade route. The crowds cheered the 2.5-hour procession of some 20,000 parade participants. As the parade passed the New York Stock Exchange, traders threw ticker tape from the windows, beginning the New York tradition of the ticker tape parade. The World newspaper noted that the city was one vast cheer. Dignitaries proceeded aboard ships to view a naval parade of more than 300 vessels before proceeding to Bedloe's Island. The dedication ceremonies included such VIPs as Francis Ferdinand de Lesseps, New York Senator William M. Evarts, who had been the chair of the American Fundraising Committee, and President Grover Cleveland. Bartholdi was called upon to speak, but he declined. Instead, he climbed to the torch to personally release a French flag that had been draped over the statue's face. A miscommunication of cues resulted in the flag being dropped early before President Cleveland had even spoken. When Cleveland did speak, his remarks were well chosen. He said, "The people of the United States accept with gratitude from their brethren of the French Republic the grand and completed work of art we here inaugurate. We are not here today to bow before the representation of a fierce and warlike God. Instead of grasping in her hand thunderbolts of terror and of death, she holds aloft the light which illuminates the way to man's enfranchisement. We will not forget that liberty has here made her home, nor shall her chosen altar be neglected. Willing votaries will constantly keep alive its fires, and these shall gleam upon the shores of our sister republic in the east. Reflected thence, and joined with answering rays, a stream of light shall pierce the darkness of ignorance and man's oppression until liberty enlightens the world. Due to the inclement weather, the dedication ceremony fireworks and torch lighting were delayed until days later. The dedication of the Statue of Liberty received immense media coverage across the United States and internationally. Here are some sample newspaper headlines from the dedication's coverage. The colossal statue dedicated with splendid ceremony. It was a fitting tribute to the Sisters' Republic's magnificent gift. An army in the march, a great fleet on the water. Our president greets the representatives of France, and 1 million of our people gather for the notable event. The rain fell, but patriotism and ardor glowed fervidly. A detailed record of the day and all its ceremonies. Bartholdi witnesses the crowning glory of a great career, the world's share in the great work gracefully acknowledged. As Lady Liberty was dedicated, it was 21 years after the dinner at Edward de Laboulaye's where the statue's concept had first been discussed. 15 years had passed since Bartholdi had first visited New York. A full decade had elapsed since the celebration of the United States centennial. After a telegraph alerted Bartholdi that his mother in France had become ill, he quickly departed. He left behind a magnificent legacy, a triumphant symbol as a touchstone reminder to a nation to preserve and cherish the preciousness of liberty. Bartholdi did eventually return to visit his creation and advocate for her preservation and development. Bartholdi continued to design and create many more amazing projects. He even designed his own funeral monument, and soon after it was finished, Bartholdi died on October the 4th of 1904. The Statue of Liberty Enlightening the World still stands as his most spectacular achievement. Highlights of more than a century. Controversy. Controversy regarding the statue began almost immediately. No members of the general public were permitted on the island during the ceremonies, which were reserved entirely for dignitaries. The only females granted access were Bartholdi's wife and Ferdinand de Lesseps' granddaughter. Officials stated that they feared women might be injured in the crush of people. The restriction offended area suffragists, who chartered a boat and got as close as they could to the island. The group's leaders made speeches applauding the embodiment of liberty as a woman and advocating women's right to vote. Other oppressed groups shared those feelings. Only 4 years earlier, the United States government had passed the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which prohibited Chinese immigration and prevented Chinese Americans from becoming United States citizens. Shortly after the dedication, the Cleveland Gazette, an African-American newspaper, suggested that the statue's torch not be lit until the United States became a free nation in reality. They wrote, "Liberty enlightening the world indeed. The expression makes us sick. This government is a howling farce. It cannot, or rather does not, protect its citizens within its own borders. Shove the Bartholdi statue, torch, and all into the ocean until the liberty of this country is such as to make it possible for an inoffensive and industrious colored man to earn a respectable living for himself and family without being Ku Kluxed, perhaps murdered, his daughter and wife outraged, and his property destroyed. The idea of the liberty of this country enlightening the world, or even Patagonia, is ridiculous in the extreme." Adaptations. Just after the turn of the century in 1900, the statue's original dull copper color began to turn green due to the oxidation of the copper skin.
Repairs were considered, but an Army Corps of Engineers study concluded the statue was not being damaged. The statue was administered by the United States Lighthouse Board until 1901, and then by the Department of War. Throughout the First World War, Lady Liberty was the last view departing and first view of the return for many World War I soldiers. On July 30th of 1916, the statue was damaged as German saboteurs in nearby New Jersey detonated carloads of explosives that were being shipped to the war efforts. Mount Rushmore sculptor Gutzon Borglum was contracted to redesign the torch. Much of the flame's copper was replaced with amber-colored glass. That same year, Ralph Pulitzer, who had succeeded his father Joseph as publisher of the World newspaper, raised funds from more than 80,000 contributors for an exterior lighting system to illuminate the statue at night. On December 2nd of 1916, President Woodrow Wilson pressed a telegraph key that turned on the lights to illuminate the statue. In 1924, President Calvin Coolidge designated the statue as a national monument. In 1933, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt transferred the site and structure to the care of the National Park Service as part of the Statue of Liberty National Monument. Liberty's lights were darkened during World War II, but were reignited on May 8th of 1945 in celebration of Victory in Europe Day. In 1956, Bedloes Island was formally renamed Liberty Island, and in 1965, nearby Ellis Island was added as part of the Statue of Liberty National Monument. In 1966, the Statue of Liberty was added to the National Register of Historic Places, and in 1984, Lady Liberty was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The UNESCO Statement of Significance describes the statue as a masterpiece of the human spirit that endures as a highly potent symbol, inspiring contemplation, debate, and protest of ideals such as liberty, peace, human rights, abolition of slavery, democracy, and opportunity. Renovation. As part of the planning for the statue's 1986 centennial, a series of assessments and renovations were completed. In May 1982, President Ronald Reagan announced the formation of the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Centennial Commission, led by Chrysler Corporation Chairman Lee Iacocca. They raised more than $350 million in donations for the renovations. Repairs were made to the copper skin, structural elements, and the torch was replaced with an exact replica of Bartholdi's unaltered torch with a flame covered in 24-karat gold. The iron support structure, designed by Gustav Eiffel, was replaced with beryllium, an alloy that bends slightly and returns to its original shape as the statue moves. The lighting was again upgraded. A grander entrance to the pedestal was framed by a set of monumental bronze doors. A modern elevator was installed, allowing mobility-impaired access to the observation area of the pedestal, and an emergency elevator was installed within the statue, reaching up to the level of the shoulder. July 3 through 6 of 1986 was designated Liberty Weekend, and President Ronald Reagan presided over the rededication with French President François Mitterrand in attendance. At the end of the concert and the fireworks, Chief Justice Warren Burger, by satellite, naturalized some 16,000 immigrants across the country. On May 16th of 2019, the new 26,000 square foot Statue of Liberty Museum opened on Liberty Island. The facility was made possible by more than $100 million in donations raised by the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Foundation. Their board fundraising chair, Diane von Furstenberg, said, "It was actually easy, because when you start to talk about her and what she represents, people somehow get moved." For more than 130 years, Lady Liberty has stood as an iconic sentry for her nation, despite visitation occasionally having been inaccessible due to renovations, security concerns, severe weather, and more. She began as a symbol of friendship between France and the United States, and a celebration of the abolition of slavery. She has embodied liberty, become an icon of the United States, and a symbol for immigration. Immigration symbol. The Statue of Liberty's development as an icon of immigration was dramatically impacted by location, a poem, and a president's speech. Ellis Island. Located near Bedloes Island in Upper New York Bay, the United States government in 1892 opened a federal immigration station on Ellis Island. For the next 62 years, until 1954, the facility served as the processing center for more than 12 million people emigrating to the United States. From 1900 to 1914, during the peak years of its operation, some 5,000 to 10,000 people passed through every day. The nearby Statue of Liberty often was the first thing those newcomers saw when arriving by boat. The new Colossus poem. Before the crates containing the disassembled pieces of Lady Liberty had ever departed France, American poet Emma Lazarus had written a poem that would become synonymous with the statue. In 1883, Lazarus was asked to compose a sonnet for an art and literary auction to raise funds for the statue's pedestal, run by the American Committee for the Statue of Liberty. Lazarus was inspired by her experiences working with refugees and the plight of immigrants, and thus included a new facet of liberty in her interpretation of what the statue could mean. The poem vividly depicts the Statue of Liberty as offering refuge to new immigrants. After the auction, the sonnet appeared in Joseph Pulitzer's The World newspaper, as well as the New York Times, but the poem actually received little attention at the time. It was not until 1901, 17 years after Lazarus's death, that friends of the poet organized a civic effort to resurrect the lost work. In 1903, the text of the poem was emblazoned on a commemorative bronze plaque, which was affixed to the base of the statue. During the 1986 renovation, the plaque was moved to be displayed in the Statue of Liberty Museum. The title of the poem and the first two lines reference the Greek colossus of Rhodes, a famous sculpture alongside the harbor of Rhodes in the 3rd century BCE. Lazarus's The New Colossus reads, "Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles, from her beacon hand glows world-wide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she, with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." FDR's 1936 speech. On October 28th of 1936, a ceremony commemorating the statue's 50th anniversary was attended by dignitaries including the French ambassador to America, André de Laboulaye, the grandson of the statue's visionary supporter. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's speech paid great tribute to the statue's evolution as an immigration icon and immigration as a central part of the nation's character. To close, here are some selections from his speech that day. For over 3 centuries, a steady stream of men, women, and children followed the beacon of liberty which this light symbolizes. They brought to us strength and moral fiber, developed in a civilization centuries old, but fired anew by the dream of a better life in America. I think it has not been sufficiently emphasized in the teaching of our history that the overwhelming majority of those who came from the nations of the old world to our American shores were not the laggard, nor the timorous, nor the failures. They were men and women who had the supreme courage to strike out for themselves. Here they found life because here was freedom to live. It is the memory of all these eager-seeking millions that makes this one of America's places of great romance. Looking down this great harbor, I like to think of the countless number of inbound vessels that have made this port. I like to think of the men and women who strained their eyes to the west for a first glimpse of the New World. They came to us speaking many tongues, but a single language, the universal language of human aspiration. How well their hopes were justified is proved by the record of what they achieved, and the richness of the promise has not run out. If we keep the faith for our day, as those who came before us kept the faith for theirs, then you and I can smile with confidence into the future. It is fitting, therefore, that this should be a service of rededication to the liberty and the peace which this statue symbolizes. Liberty and peace are living things. In each generation, if they are to be maintained, they must be guarded and vitalized anew. We do only a small part of our duty to America when we glory in the great past. Patriotism that stops with that is a too easy patriotism, a patriotism out of step with the patriots themselves. For each generation, the more patriotic part is to carry forward American freedom and American peace by making them living facts in a living present. To that, we do rededicate ourselves. Closing. My name is Bill Wiemuth, and I thank you for joining me for this History Highlights presentation about the Statue of Liberty. I certainly hope you've enjoyed learning from this presentation, and I also hope you are developing a fascination for history. We are proud to provide you with an amazing collection of fascinating stories from United States history that you can read, listen to, or watch in about an hour. For access to free learning programs and special discount offers, visit historyhighlights.com. Thank you so much for joining me for this presentation. Please recommend our historyhighlights.com learning programs to your friends and family, and be sure to register to receive free and discounted learning programs by visiting us at historyhighlights.com.